Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a fascinating and secret world, the midnight tea rituals along the Silk routes. You may think you know everything about tea, but trust me, these are no ordinary tea times. Picture yourself in a distant, ancient world, where traders and wanderers gather in the dead of night, not just for tea but for ancient traditions, strange ceremonies, and mysterious, hidden stories. These secret rituals were never about convenience or caffeine, they were about something much deeper. Ancient tea traders, crossing vast deserts and impassable mountain ranges, would arrive in remote, hidden oasis towns only under the cover of night. Why? Because this was a world where information, customs, and goods were protected by secrecy, and tea was the currency of these clandestine exchanges. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from tonight. What time is it where you are? I can already imagine how the night outside your window wraps itself in mystery, just like the ancient paths these traders walked. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The origins of the Silk Route tea rituals are both ancient and shrouded in mystery. It's not easy to pinpoint exactly when traders began practicing these midnight tea ceremonies, but historians have traced them back to the very beginning of the Silk Road, around the 2nd century BCE. What's fascinating is that this wasn't just a routine, it was a deeply symbolic act, woven into the fabric of the Silk Road itself. Tea was introduced to the trade routes by the Han dynasty around the time of the 2nd century BCE, initially just a luxury item to be bartered. As the demand for tea grew, so did its significance, eventually becoming an essential part of the traveler's journeys. Over time, tea began to transcend its role as a mere commodity. It became something far more, an instrument of connection, communication, and survival. Traders didn't just carry tea to exchange it for silk or precious stones, they also carried traditions that spanned centuries and countless cultures. These tea rituals were born not out of casual custom but as a means of survival and status. Tea served as both a vital stimulant and a symbol of connection between diverse cultures, navigating vast geographical distances and deeply rooted cultural differences. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Silk Route tea rituals is how they were often performed in secret, at night. Why, you ask? Well, it wasn't just about enjoying a hot beverage. The nighttime setting served multiple purposes. First, the cover of darkness provided a sense of protection. The trade routes were fraught with dangers, bandits, thieves, and rival traders lurked in the daylight. The secrecy of nighttime provided safety for both the traders and their precious cargo. But there was also a deeper, more symbolic reason: the night held spiritual significance. The ancients believed that the night was a time when the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds was thinnest. In a world where belief in the supernatural was part of everyday life, it made perfect sense that these traders would choose the cover of night to perform their most sacred rituals. There's something almost magical about the thought of these ancient traders stopping for tea in the dead of night, surrounded by the unbroken quiet of the desert or mountains. Under the cloak of darkness, these tea sessions became sacred, a time to reflect, commune, and trade ideas in hushed tones. The moonlit desert became their stage, and the only audience. The stars. Historians still argue whether these night rituals were as sacred as they were strategic, but the truth is, the darkness of night offered both a veil of secrecy and a moment to reset before the journey continued. And yet, while the origins remain hazy, one thing is clear: this wasn't just about quenching thirst. This was a ritual, one that brought together diverse cultures in a shared moment of stillness, creating a quiet camaraderie across otherwise distant, disconnected lives. Tea wasn't just a drink, but a meeting ground, a shared experience in a world filled with tensions and distances. A common thread woven through the myriad cultures that lived, traded, and survived along the Silk Road. You can almost hear the rustling of tea leaves, the slow pour of hot water into a cup, the hiss of steam rising into the cool night air. And there's more than just the aroma of tea filling the air, there's the sensation of bonding, of a shared moment where differences dissolve, and for a brief time, traders from different lands sit together, united by the warmth of their tea. The first step in understanding these midnight tea rituals lies in seeing how they evolved from the very beginning. Tea was far more than a mere beverage, it was the lifeblood of this secretive, midnight culture. Its value was immeasurable, not just because of its rarity but because of its ability to create bonds between people from all walks of life. The ritual began as a tool of survival, with merchants using tea as both a physical and symbolic bridge between cultures. Whether it was used to warm chilled hands during a snowstorm or to keep conversations flowing in the heat of the desert night, tea became much more than just a drink, it was a statement of life, culture, and even identity. But here's the kicker, you probably won't survive this if you can't appreciate the subtlety of these ancient practices. These tea rituals were so secretive that only those who truly understood the deeper cultural significance were allowed to participate. You might sip your tea in the comfort of your home, but imagine a time when every sip had the power to bind you to another culture, to another people, in a world where borders and allegiances were constantly shifting. The stakes? Higher than you could ever imagine. The Silk Route wasn't just a trade route for goods, it was the trade route of secrets. These rituals, performed in the dead of night, allowed those who traveled the route to keep their bonds strong, to ensure their safety, and to communicate in ways that the daylight couldn't offer. Without a doubt, tea was the unspoken currency of these midnight gatherings, and it still is, in many ways. So let's travel back to a time when every cup of tea carried an unspoken story of survival, strategy, and silent bonds forged beneath the stars. As we continue our journey tonight, let's follow the faint trace of a caravan moving through the vast, unyielding terrain that once formed the backbone of the Silk Road. Picture the dust settling in the cool evening air as traders from distant lands gather together, tired, yet eager for the connection that awaits them. But what are they bringing with them? Of course, there's the precious cargo of silk, spices, and exotic treasures, but among these goods, there's one thing they're carrying that's even more important, the tea. We've already dipped our toes into the origins of these tea rituals, but now let's explore the very practical side of this midnight tradition, how the traders used the cover of night to conduct their commerce. The silk routes were never simple paths, they were sprawling, winding arteries that spanned from China to Europe, passing through deserts, mountains, and bustling oases. And during their long, grueling journeys, traders needed to rest, resupply, and sometimes even conspire in secrecy. The darkness offered them a cloak to do all of this. Historians still argue whether these night exchanges were as much about the goods as they were about the unspoken trust built through shared experiences, but one thing is for sure, tea played a central role. To grasp the significance of tea on these journeys, you need to understand just how difficult life was for these traders. Moving from one trading post to the next, traversing arid deserts or crossing towering mountains, often meant more than just a long trek, it was a battle for survival. Tea, however, was much more than a commodity. It was essential, not just for quenching thirst but for sustaining the body and mind on long, strenuous routes. The humble cup of tea was not just an afternoon pick-me-up but a vital source of energy that could make the difference between making it to the next stop or succumbing to exhaustion. The importance of tea as a practical item is often overlooked, but in the treacherous lands of the Silk Road, it was the key to maintaining strength. But how did tea play into these midnight meetings? The setting of these nighttime gatherings wasn't just about comfort or replenishment, it was a chance for traders to exchange more than just goods. While merchants might have traded their silk or precious gems during the day, at night, the stakes were different. Under the moonlit sky, there was space for more intimate, strategic exchanges. These weren't just simple bartering sessions, they were where alliances were forged, where secrets were shared, and where ideas spread across the vast stretches of land like wildfire. It's easy to think of the Silk Road as a linear trade route, a highway for goods moving in a straight line from east to west. But that's not the whole picture. The route was a network, more like a series of interconnected webs, each one tied together by shared customs, traditions, and, crucially, tea. For these merchants, tea was both a physical necessity and a symbolic bridge that connected diverse cultures. In the cool night air, they could sit together in a circle, sharing tea, and speaking of matters that weren't always safe for daylight conversations. Imagine yourself among them, passing a steaming cup from hand to hand, feeling the warmth of the liquid seep through the porcelain, while under the sky, distant stars witness your every word. But there was another side to these meetings, an even more intriguing aspect of tea's role. Not all of these midnight rituals were about business. Some were, in fact, steeped in a cultural exchange that went far beyond the marketplace. Merchants from distant lands, each with their own beliefs and customs, brought their knowledge, their stories, and their rituals to the table. Tea, in this context, wasn't just a shared beverage, it became a vehicle for the exchange of philosophies, wisdom, and history. You might have a trader from India sitting next to one from China, each speaking in different languages, yet bonded by the universal act of sipping tea. Historians have noted that these exchanges often took on a spiritual tone, especially when the tea was prepared with local herbs and blends unique to the regions they passed through. For instance, in Central Asia, traders would steep tea with herbs like sage or mint, which had medicinal properties believed to calm the body and soothe the mind. And this wasn't just about refreshment, it was about rejuvenation, physically and spiritually. With every sip, they were not just replenishing their energy but also resetting their minds, fortifying their spirits for the long road ahead. Oh, and don't be fooled, tea wasn't just any old drink at these midnight rendezvous. It was a well-kept secret in its own right. The knowledge of which herbs to add, the right temperatures for brewing, and the precise moments for sipping were passed down through generations, carefully guarded by the elite few who knew their value. Tea was part of a broader system of secrecy, with each merchant guarding their tea-making practices as closely as they guarded their goods. Historians still argue whether the secrecy surrounding the tea rituals was as important as the trade itself. Some suggest it was a means of creating a sacred atmosphere. After all, the ritualized preparation and consumption of tea could have been seen as a form of protection. Others believe it was more about creating a sense of community in an otherwise fragmented and often hostile world. Either way, the act of drinking tea became a ritual, a spiritual necessity to accompany the weary traveler through the harsh landscapes of the Silk Road. As the night wore on and the desert air cooled, the traders gathered around their campfires. The sounds of whispers and clinking cups filled the air, and under the vast, starry sky, these midnight tea rituals took on a life of their own. In that moment, there was no divide between East and West, no difference between merchant and trader. There was just the shared experience of tea, a drink that, for a fleeting moment, made the vast distances of the Silk Road feel a little smaller, a little more connected. At the heart of these rituals, then, wasn't just commerce or trade, it was the ability to sustain and reconnect. The traders, through the shared experience of tea, were able to strengthen the threads that tied their cultures together, creating a network that stretched across the known world. Now that we've set the stage for these midnight tea rituals along the Silk Road, let's take a step back and explore the atmosphere that made these gatherings so captivating and mysterious. Imagine yourself on one of those starry nights, sitting under the inky sky, your eyes squinting at the horizon where the faint glow of distant fires illuminates the darkness. The only sounds are the crackling of the fire and the faint whispers of voices mixing with the desert wind. You're not just any ordinary traveler, you're part of a tradition that's as ancient as the very land beneath your feet. The air is filled with the scent of freshly steeped tea, mingling with the earthy aroma of sage and mint. It's a sensory experience, one that transcends the simple act of drinking a beverage. But what really sets these tea rituals apart from anything you might experience today is the belief that these moments were more than just a way to pass the time. They were deeply spiritual. The act of preparing tea, serving it, and sipping it was an art form, and it wasn't just about the taste. There was something magical about the entire process. It wasn't just about satisfying the physical need for hydration or refreshment. This was a spiritual ritual, a form of communion with the world around you and the cultures that surrounded you. Historians still debate the spiritual significance of tea on the Silk Road. Some argue that the practice was born from a belief in celestial forces, while others suggest it was simply a practical ritual born out of necessity. But regardless of the origins, what's clear is that the act of drinking tea under the stars was an intimate, transcendent experience. It was a time to pause, to reflect, and to connect, not just with the people around you but with something larger, something beyond the physical world. Picture this: traders, some from regions as distant as Persia, India, and China, gathering around a campfire, teacups in hand, their faces lit by the flickering flames. And yet, despite the physical distance between them, there was a sense of unity in the shared ritual. Tea, at this hour, was no longer just a commodity, it had become a sacred bond, something that connected them in ways that words or trade goods could never accomplish. The importance of tea wasn't just about the beverage itself, it was the way it was consumed. For instance, the tea preparation was often a slow, deliberate process, each step carried out with reverence. In Central Asia, traders might steep their tea with a combination of local herbs, each with its own purpose. One could add thyme for clarity, rosemary for protection, or saffron to induce a state of inner calm. The act of making tea became an offering, a gesture of respect not just for the tea itself, but for the people they were sharing it with. Oh, and don't imagine these tea sessions were quiet affairs. While there were times for silence and reflection, there were also times for conversation. Tea was the vehicle for sharing stories, exchanging news, and, sometimes, even telling secrets. Some of these secrets were business-related, but many were personal, family stories, tales of home, and legends passed down from generation to generation. It's easy to imagine how, after a few cups, the conversation would shift, not just to trade or politics, but to deeper matters. Imagine listening to a wandering Persian merchant tell tales of distant lands while you sip your tea, all while the fire crackles in the background. It was an immersive experience that tied together history, culture, and tradition. But let's take a closer look at the details. The tea itself wasn't always the same. While the merchants from China might prefer their green tea, the traders from Central Asia might favor herbal blends, or even pressed brick tea, a kind of compressed tea that was popular in Tibet. Each region had its own style, its own way of preparing and drinking tea. But despite these differences, there was a common thread: tea was a symbol of hospitality, a ritual that welcomed all travelers, no matter their origin. The way tea was served also carried great significance. In some regions, it was offered in small, delicate cups, while in others, it was poured into large, communal vessels. The method of serving tea could signal the rank of the individual offering it or the purpose of the gathering itself. Some merchants, for example, would serve tea from a shared pot, encouraging equality and camaraderie among their fellow travelers. Others might serve it in individual cups, with each sip carrying a more personal, intimate meaning. Tea, in this context, wasn't just a drink, it was a social glue, a way of fostering connections between people from vastly different backgrounds. The midnight tea rituals on the Silk Road were, in many ways, a microcosm of the broader Silk Road experience itself, diverse, interconnected, and ever-changing. But they were also a reminder of the deep human need for connection, for bonding with others across time, space, and culture. As you sip your tea on that silent, star-filled night, you're part of a long and sacred tradition. It's easy to overlook the simplicity of the moment, the quiet ritual of drinking tea. But remember, these were moments of peace, of reflection, and of unity in a world that was, for the most part, defined by its chaos and uncertainty. In that single cup of tea, you could find not just warmth and comfort, but also solace and connection. Historians still argue whether these tea rituals were primarily about survival or spirituality, but maybe, just maybe, they were a bit of both. These ceremonies, performed under the stars, held a unique power to transform even the harshest landscapes into a place of peace and refuge. In the midst of the harsh deserts or cold mountain ranges, tea brought comfort and, dare I say, a little bit of magic. Imagine the contrast: the vast, empty deserts by day, teeming with danger, and then the quiet, intimate tea sessions by night, where every sip carried the weight of centuries of tradition. In that brief moment, sitting with traders from distant lands, you would feel a deep sense of belonging, one that transcends borders and backgrounds. Tea wasn't just something you drank, it was a thread that tied you to the past, to the stories of those who had come before, and to the travelers who would follow. As we continue through the desert night, now imagine the warmth of that cup of tea in your hands, but the experience is about to take a turn into the medicinal, because, believe it or not, tea wasn't just a ceremonial beverage. It was a vital part of a long, complex tradition of medicine along the Silk Road. While these merchants and traders were often surrounded by the harshest of conditions, extreme heat, freezing cold, and the constant physical toll of travel, tea became a remedy, an elixir of sorts that provided far more than a caffeine boost. Historians still argue whether these early tea-based medicinal practices were based on actual scientific knowledge or folk wisdom passed down over generations, but there's no doubt that tea was treated as a healing potion in many parts of the Silk Road. It wasn't just about quenching thirst. No, it was about restoring balance, both of the body and mind. Tea was considered sacred and powerful, capable of everything from curing headaches to improving digestion to even combating exhaustion. You couldn't just drink tea to stay awake during those long nights. Tea was a necessity to maintain health and vitality in a world filled with danger and strain. The concept of medicinal tea was deeply rooted in the traditions of ancient China, where herbal infusions were used as holistic remedies long before the world had even heard of modern medicine. Chinese traders would carry these ancient recipes with them, passing them along to Central Asian merchants, and soon enough, the knowledge of tea's curative properties spread across the Silk Road. And believe me, the recipes weren't just your typical, black or green tea with a dash of sugar. Traders would combine a wide variety of herbs and spices into their brews. Imagine sipping a cup of tea made from local herbs like ginseng, cinnamon, or even ginger, known for their restorative qualities. These weren't just beverages, they were tools of survival. Now, as you're sitting there with your tea on a cool night under the stars, think about how the blend you're sipping might not just be a traditional Chinese green tea but could have been mixed with powerful ingredients like goji berries or rhubarb root. These ingredients were more than just flavors, they were believed to keep you healthy and energized, which, in the context of the perilous journey across harsh terrain, was nothing short of necessary. Interestingly, the use of herbal teas was more than just a practical necessity, it was also entwined with the spiritual beliefs of the traders. The belief that certain herbs carried spiritual power wasn't confined to one particular culture along the Silk Road. Tea served as a connection between the physical and spiritual realms. For instance, tea might be brewed with herbs that were believed to open the mind to communication with deities, or herbs that were thought to protect the drinker from evil spirits. The tea ritual, then, became a means of fortifying not just the body, but the spirit, as well. Oh, and I have to tell you, the way these ancient travelers prepared their tea was nothing short of elaborate. Picture the preparation being a ritual in itself, each step deliberately carried out, each herb added with intention, and each pour of the boiling water as purposeful as a monk's prayer. Imagine watching the steam rise from the teapot as the herbs unfurl into the liquid. The scent alone would have been enough to signal that something deeper was happening here. Even the simplest ingredients had their role. Take mint, for instance. It was believed to be a digestive aid, and often, it was added to tea in hopes of alleviating stomach issues after long days on the road. Or ginseng, prized for its revitalizing effects, used to combat fatigue and boost energy. Ginger was often included as a remedy for nausea, no doubt a common issue on long caravan rides, especially when the terrain was difficult. These medicinal blends were tailored to the specific needs of the traders, depending on where they were on their journey and what they might be suffering from physically. What's fascinating is how these health benefits of tea weren't just based on ancient practices but were woven into the very culture of the Silk Road. Tea was not just a simple drink, it was part of a larger system of wellness, a tradition that combined ancient knowledge with the modern realities of long-distance travel. These blends didn't just make you feel better physically, they also made you feel protected, part of a greater tradition that spanned across continents and centuries. And yet, there's something else to consider here. The perception of tea as medicine wasn't just practical, it also reflected the beliefs of these traders. By drinking tea, they were participating in an act of sacred healing, a reminder that their journeys were not only about commerce, but also about their very survival. The tea they drank wasn't just a commodity, it was a key to enduring the extreme conditions of their travels. It was both a physical and spiritual safeguard, providing protection not only from the elements but also from the many dangers, both real and imagined, that existed along the route. Of course, these tea-based remedies weren't always foolproof, and there were certainly limits to what herbal blends could cure. Historians have found evidence that many travelers fell ill on the road, whether from exhaustion, exposure to the elements, or diseases spread by the unsanitary conditions of the trade routes. And yet, the act of drinking tea, a moment of solace in the chaos of their journeys, provided not just physical comfort but mental reprieve. Imagine being able to take a moment, late at night, to steep your tea, breathe in the fragrance, and allow the warmth to settle into your bones. That small act must have felt like a respite from the hardships of the road, a way to reconnect with your body, your mind, and your fellow travelers. Historians still argue whether the medicinal properties of these teas were truly as effective as the traders believed, but there's no denying the power of the ritual itself. The tea didn't just heal the body, it healed the soul. In a world where every day could bring danger or despair, tea was the small act of self-care, a chance to pause and recover. So, as you sip your own tea tonight, think about how the ritual of preparing it may have been as significant as the benefits of the tea itself. Tea was a symbol of endurance, of tradition, and of life itself along the Silk Road. It was more than a drink, it was a means of survival, a companion on the long, winding paths of history. The soft glow of the fire flickers, the aroma of tea still lingering in the air, and the night grows deeper, shrouding the traders in a quiet, almost sacred atmosphere. But now, let's shift focus a bit, because as much as tea was about survival, it was also about something more secretive and even more captivating, the role tea played in sacred spaces. These weren't just roadside gatherings or casual tea breaks at a merchant's stall. Oh no, these were tea ceremonies conducted in temples, shrines, and other places that carried an air of reverence, mystery, and ritual. Historians still argue whether these sacred tea rituals had a religious significance or whether they were more about establishing trust among traders and preserving the sanctity of the Silk Road's vast network. What's fascinating is that these tea ceremonies were not just about preparing and sipping, it was about the spaces themselves. Imagine entering a temple in the heart of Central Asia, perhaps surrounded by ancient stone walls and carved inscriptions in languages you don't understand. The air is thick with incense, the hum of distant chanting reverberates through the space, and in the center, a few traders gather to perform the sacred act of brewing tea. This wasn't just about quenching thirst. It was about invoking a deeper connection, either to the divine or to something greater than the physical world. Tea in these sacred spaces was often combined with other rituals, incense burning, chants, and meditative prayers. The belief was that the tea served as an offering, a way to align oneself with the forces of the universe and to receive protection or blessings for the journey ahead. Imagine, for a moment, that you're sitting in one of these temple tea ceremonies. The heat from the teapot radiates into the cool air, and the steam curls upward, disappearing into the vaulted ceiling. Around you, traders from all corners of the known world are seated, their faces calm, reflective, lost in the quiet reverence of the moment. In these moments, it wasn't about the tea itself, it was about the collective energy shared by the participants, the unspoken agreement that, together, they were partaking in something ancient, something sacred. But tea didn't only serve a spiritual function. It was also deeply linked to social and cultural exchanges, and in temples, that bond became more apparent. The temples weren't just places of worship, they were also meeting grounds, where traders would exchange information, make deals, and solidify alliances. But the atmosphere of these sacred spaces was different from the hustle and bustle of the market. Here, silence reigned, and the act of drinking tea was just one of many rituals that bound these disparate cultures together. Imagine entering one of these spaces as an outsider, not yet part of the close-knit community, but drinking tea with them, participating in a moment of stillness and connection. That shared silence, that sacred bond formed through the ritual of tea, was its own kind of language. There was also something undeniably powerful about the act of drinking tea in these spaces. It wasn't just about peace, it was about power. These were the spaces where influential figures came together, where decisions were made that would shape the future of the Silk Road. There, seated on carved stone floors, surrounded by the tranquil echoes of sacred space, tea served as a mediator, a neutral ground. Tea offered a moment of stillness in the midst of turbulent times, a rare opportunity for leaders, traders, and merchants to come together, discuss, and agree on the terms of their often precarious lives. Interestingly, while these tea ceremonies took place in temples and shrines, they also often took place in the more humble settings of caravanserais, those roadside inns where weary travelers would rest. But even here, in these more modest surroundings, tea retained its sanctity. Caravanserais weren't just places to sleep and eat, they were sanctuaries, places of refuge and recovery for the traders who had been on the road for weeks, sometimes months. And just as in the grand temples, the simple act of drinking tea in these places became a ritual that marked the transition from the chaotic external world to a peaceful, introspective moment. The tea that was served in these settings often had a specific purpose, too. It wasn't just about warming up after a cold night in the desert. For example, in some areas of the Silk Road, traders believed that certain teas, when brewed with particular herbs, could ward off the evil eye or protect them from harm. Tea wasn't just a drink, it was a shield, a form of spiritual protection in a world filled with dangers. The herbs added to the tea weren't just chosen for their medicinal benefits, they were selected for their spiritual properties as well. The most powerful teas were often brewed with ingredients that carried an aura of mysticism, such as lotus blossoms, which were believed to bring enlightenment, or saffron, thought to bring blessings and divine favor. These sacred ingredients weren't just found in temples, but in the more ordinary settings of caravans and inns. In fact, for many, these herbs were what made tea so much more than just a drink. They were symbolic of the deep connection between the material world and the spiritual one. But here's the most intriguing part of these sacred tea ceremonies. While tea was often used as a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, there was also an element of secrecy. Much like the midnight tea rituals, there was an air of mystery surrounding these sacred ceremonies. The specifics of the tea-making process, the herbs used, and the exact rites performed were closely guarded secrets, passed down only to trusted individuals. Some scholars even believe that these tea rituals, which occurred in sacred spaces, were used to test the loyalty and trustworthiness of new arrivals, whether they were traders, leaders, or anyone else seeking to join these tight-knit communities. Oh, and this secrecy wasn't just a cultural quirk, it was deeply embedded in the nature of the Silk Road itself. The exchange of goods, ideas, and traditions wasn't always a peaceful affair. There were times when factions were at odds, when diplomacy was fragile, and when trust was hard to come by. In these moments, tea served as a symbolic gesture, a way to test, to bond, and to build alliances. So, when tea was served in these sacred spaces, it wasn't just a peaceful offering, it was a way of ensuring that those who partook were true to the spirit of the Silk Road, connected, trusted, and part of a much larger system. As the tea cools in your cup and the night wears on, think about the ways these sacred tea moments shaped the course of history. In temples, shrines, and humble inns alike, tea became more than just a drink, it was a link in the chain of a vast network that spanned continents, cultures, and generations. And through these rituals, it became a symbol of unity and connection that transcended boundaries. Now that we've explored the spiritual significance of tea, both in sacred spaces and amidst the harsh realities of travel, let's turn to another crucial figure in the world of Silk Road tea, the mysterious tea masters. You may have heard of tea as a commodity, an item exchanged across continents, but what about the people who were responsible for its preparation, preservation, and the sacred tradition surrounding it? Tea masters, whose role was as elusive as it was essential, were often the ones behind the very rituals we've been discussing. But despite their importance, very little is known about them, and what we do know often veers into the realm of myth and mystery. Historians still argue whether the tea masters were independent mystics or simply highly skilled merchants, but one thing is clear, these individuals were integral to the functioning of the Silk Road's tea culture. Their ability to create and maintain the complex tea rituals that defined the Silk Road made them highly sought after and, in many cases, highly secretive figures. Imagine yourself walking into a dimly lit caravanserai on the edge of an ancient trading post, only to be greeted by one of these tea masters. They weren't like your average tea seller, they were artisans, steeped in centuries-old traditions. They knew the subtle alchemy of herbs, spices, and tea leaves, blending them in ways that few could replicate. In many ways, they were the unsung architects of the Silk Road's tea culture. Oh, and don't get too comfortable thinking you could easily become a tea master yourself. The path to mastery was long and arduous. To earn this title, one had to learn the intricate art of tea making, how to steep it perfectly, how to select the finest herbs, and perhaps most importantly, how to read the tea itself. Tea masters weren't simply people who knew how to brew a cup, they were people who understood the deep, almost mystical properties of tea, and they used their knowledge not only to brew tea but to manipulate it in ways that had spiritual, medicinal, and social significance. The training of a tea master involved years of study, beginning as apprentices under the guidance of established masters. During their apprenticeship, they would learn not just about the physical preparation of tea but also about the philosophical and spiritual aspects of tea culture. The relationship between the tea and the person drinking it was as important as the tea itself, and tea masters were entrusted with guiding others to understand and appreciate that delicate balance. The mastery of tea involved an intimate connection between the tea maker, the herbs, and the person consuming it. In a way, the tea master acted as an intermediary, bringing the essence of the tea and the spirit of the land into a shared experience. These masters, however, didn't just brew tea for trade, they played a pivotal role in maintaining the secrecy of the rituals. Their knowledge was often closely guarded, passed down only to a select few, and even then, under strict confidentiality. The methods they used for brewing tea, the ingredients they included, and the specific tea leaves they sourced were considered top-secret information. In some cases, they were thought to be carrying not just tea, but also sacred knowledge from distant lands, knowledge that was key to surviving on the road. The secrecy surrounding tea masters wasn't limited to their craft. In many cultures along the Silk Road, tea masters were seen as gatekeepers, holding the keys to rituals that connected the physical world with the spiritual. They weren't just teachers of tea, they were teachers of life, wisdom, and even diplomacy. The mere act of serving tea in the presence of a master was an event filled with meaning. They could look into your eyes, watch the way you sipped your tea, and from that, discern everything from your emotional state to your level of trustworthiness. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The tea masters often wielded a kind of quiet influence that extended far beyond their immediate circle. Their knowledge of the subtle effects of tea was considered a form of power. This power wasn't just in their ability to brew the perfect cup, it was in their ability to navigate the social intricacies of the Silk Road. Tea was more than just a trade good, it was a form of currency, used to gain favor, seal deals, or even sway the outcome of a negotiation. But, of course, with great power comes great mystery. The tea masters were rarely seen in the public eye. While many of the Silk Road's traders were known for their skills in business and diplomacy, the tea masters remained an enigmatic and almost elusive group. They weren't flashy or outgoing. Instead, they moved in the shadows, pulling the strings behind closed doors, their influence spreading across cultures and continents without ever being truly recognized. This air of secrecy around them only added to their mystique and importance. In fact, the tea master's reputation extended far beyond the borders of the Silk Road. It's said that even some of the great empires of the time sought out the knowledge of these experts, hoping to tap into the secrets of the perfect tea blend. The ancient emperors of China, for instance, were known to have employed the most skilled tea masters, who brewed tea not only for the imperial court but also as a way to maintain favor with the gods. It wasn't unusual for a tea master to be summoned to a royal court, where their knowledge of tea was treated with the same level of reverence as the most respected sages and advisors. Imagine walking into an emperor's court, surrounded by the lush gardens of a palace, and being greeted by a tea master who has traveled hundreds, if not thousands, of miles to reach this point. The ritual that would follow was not just about tea, it was about connecting the emperor, the gods, and the people through this one simple act. Tea, in the hands of a master, became a bridge between the earthly and the divine. But it wasn't just the rulers who sought the guidance of tea masters. Merchants, travelers, and ordinary people also sought out their expertise, hoping to gain the knowledge needed to prepare the perfect cup of tea. The role of the tea master wasn't just to serve tea, it was to preserve and protect the traditions of tea culture, ensuring that its secrets were passed down through generations. Oh, and here's a fun tidbit: while tea masters were often revered for their knowledge, they were also often shrouded in mystery. There are even stories of tea masters who, upon reaching the peak of their knowledge, would disappear from public life entirely, retreating into the mountains or hidden temples, never to be seen again. Whether this was a deliberate choice or a result of their secretive nature is unclear, but it certainly adds to the allure and myth of these enigmatic figures. So, as you sit there sipping your tea tonight, think about the tea masters who might have once prepared a cup just like the one in your hands, whether for an emperor, a weary traveler, or a merchant passing through a remote desert oasis. Their legacy lives on, in every sip and every steeped leaf. As we linger in the shadows of the Silk Road, surrounded by stories of tea masters and sacred rituals, let's now shift gears and venture deeper into the hidden markets of Central Asia, those underground spaces where tea was more than a simple trade good, it was a symbol of power, influence, and mystery. You've heard of bustling marketplaces where goods are openly exchanged, but the hidden tea markets were something entirely different. These markets were known only to those who were deeply entrenched in the Silk Road's secretive culture, and their significance goes far beyond the simple exchange of tea. Historians still argue whether these hidden tea markets were purely about economic gain or whether they also played a role in the political intrigue of the time. One thing's for sure, though, these markets weren't on any maps. They were off the beaten path, tucked away in dark alleyways, behind veils of secrecy, and guarded by those who held the keys to the most coveted secrets of the Silk Road. To enter these markets, you had to be more than just a merchant, you had to be trusted, respected, and, often, well-connected. Imagine yourself as a traveler, moving through a dusty desert town, feeling the heat of the sun on your face, when suddenly, you're led down an alley, into a hidden courtyard, and from there, through a narrow passageway into an underground market that thrives on secrecy. The air smells of incense and something sweeter, perhaps the tea itself, mixed with spices you can't quite identify. It's quiet here, the conversations hushed, with only the soft sounds of traders bargaining over exotic tea blends, herbs, and other goods. In this world, tea isn't just for quenching thirst, it's a prized commodity, more valuable than you might realize. These hidden tea markets were a world unto themselves, away from the prying eyes of the general populace. Only those who truly understood the ways of the Silk Road were allowed entry. And once inside, the power dynamics of these markets were palpable. Tea wasn't just a drink, it was a bargaining chip, a form of currency, and sometimes even a form of leverage in negotiations. Tea traders weren't just merchants, they were powerful figures in their own right, and they played a key role in the geopolitics of the Silk Road. They were the ones who controlled the flow of goods between the East and West, dictating the terms of trade, establishing alliances, and sometimes even influencing the outcome of wars. Oh, and make no mistake, tea was no mere luxury good, it was often treated as a form of diplomacy. Imagine a scenario where a powerful ruler or merchant in the East could offer an exclusive blend of tea to a rival, not only as a gesture of goodwill but as a way to secure favorable trade terms or political leverage. The influence of tea in these secret markets was far-reaching, shaping everything from personal relationships to the very balance of power along the Silk Road. Now, let's talk about the tea itself. The goods exchanged in these markets were often rare and coveted, blends that couldn't be found anywhere else. While some traders dealt in standard tea, others specialized in more exotic offerings. Some markets traded pressed tea bricks, a form of compressed tea leaves that were both portable and valuable. This type of tea was often favored by the nomadic traders who needed to carry their supplies over long distances, especially in the more remote regions of the Silk Road. But it wasn't just about the type of tea, it was also about the way it was prepared and presented. Certain traders in these secret markets would specialize in brewing specific kinds of tea, often with the inclusion of rare herbs, spices, or even medicinal plants that gave the tea its own unique properties. The blending of these ingredients wasn't just about creating something flavorful, it was about crafting a tea that held meaning and purpose, whether that was for healing, spiritual enlightenment, or even protection. Tea wasn't just a commodity, it was a reflection of the cultures and beliefs of the traders themselves. One of the most fascinating aspects of these hidden tea markets was the way they reflected the diversity of the Silk Road. Traders from all over Asia, the Middle East, and even parts of Europe would converge in these underground spaces, each bringing their own styles and traditions to the tea. The markets were a melting pot of cultures, each blending their own distinct influences into the tea trade. For example, a Persian merchant might bring saffron to mix with Chinese green tea, while a Central Asian trader might introduce an herbal blend designed to promote stamina during long journeys. Each cup of tea served in these markets was a representation of the global network that was the Silk Road, a network that spanned cultures, borders, and ideas. But as the Silk Road progressed and the dynamics of the region shifted, these hidden markets began to take on a more clandestine tone. As the influence of larger empires grew, the secret tea markets became even more tightly controlled, with only the most trusted individuals allowed to participate. Those who were involved in these markets weren't just traders, they were often spies, diplomats, or power brokers in their own right. The quiet nature of the tea trade, its ability to move discreetly across borders, made it an ideal vehicle for those involved in the shifting political landscape of the time. And, let's not forget the secretive nature of the tea itself. Many traders and merchants in these hidden markets kept their methods of tea preparation a closely guarded secret. They would often go to great lengths to ensure that their techniques were never shared with outsiders, fearing that revealing the secret of their blends would lead to the loss of their competitive edge. Tea was as much about secrecy as it was about the goods themselves. And as much as these traders were skilled in the art of tea making, they were equally adept at navigating the complex world of espionage, using their tea to gain favor and influence in ways that were often invisible to the outside world. You might think that the exchange of tea in these hidden markets was a simple trade, but it was far more than that. It was a dance of power, a silent negotiation, and a way to wield influence without ever saying a word. The very act of sipping tea in these spaces was an unspoken language, a way for traders to communicate their intentions, their loyalty, and their power. The existence of these secret markets offers a glimpse into a world that was defined not just by what was traded, but by the networks of influence and secrecy that shaped the Silk Road. Tea, as simple as it might seem to us today, was a key part of that world, a symbol of power, influence, and connection in a time when the world was anything but simple. Now that we've explored the hidden markets where tea became more than just a commodity, let's travel further east, beyond the deserts and mountains, to where tea was intertwined with the celestial world, where the stars themselves influenced the preparation of tea. As wild as it sounds, there's a belief that the cosmos shaped the very way tea was brewed, served, and consumed along the Silk Road. And no, this isn't some mystical idea pulled from thin air. The idea that tea could be brewed in harmony with the stars is rooted in ancient beliefs and astrological traditions that shaped the lives of those who traversed the Silk Road. Imagine yourself sitting under a starry sky in the heart of Central Asia, a place where the endless horizon stretches before you. The ancient traders and travelers who passed through this region weren't just concerned with trade, they were also concerned with the alignment of the heavens. And they believed that the stars and planets had a profound influence on every aspect of their lives, including how they prepared their tea. Tea, they believed, could carry the energy of the cosmos, and if it were brewed at the right time, under the right stars, it could unlock special powers. Historians still argue whether the astrology of tea was simply a product of cultural beliefs or whether it had actual effects on the tea itself. Regardless, the symbolism of tea and the stars cannot be overlooked. The celestial connection to tea was rooted in the traditions of ancient Persia, China, and Central Asia, all of which held astrology in high regard. Traders believed that the positioning of the stars and planets influenced the very essence of their tea, its strength, flavor, and even its medicinal properties. For instance, certain tea blends were believed to be most potent when brewed during specific lunar phases, when the moon was either waxing or waning. Others believed that specific planets, like Venus or Mercury, influenced the type of tea you should drink to improve your mood or energy. But what did it mean to brew tea according to the stars? Well, it wasn't as simple as just checking a calendar. Traders and tea masters would often consult with astrologers to determine the best time to brew their tea. They would look for favorable alignments of the planets and constellations, which would tell them when to harvest the leaves or when to prepare the tea. Certain times of the year, like the winter solstice or the equinox, were seen as especially auspicious for making certain types of tea. Some traders even believed that if you brewed tea at the wrong time, under an unfavorable alignment of the stars, it would have negative effects, either on the flavor or on the health of the person drinking it. For example, in Chinese astrology, there was a belief that tea made during the first full moon of the year would enhance a person's vitality, making it the perfect drink for starting a new year or embarking on a long journey. In Central Asia, tea prepared during specific lunar phases was thought to have healing powers, particularly for ailments that plagued the long-distance travelers of the Silk Road. There were even particular star signs that traders believed would favor a tea's ability to aid in digestion, calm nerves, or improve circulation. Oh, and here's where it gets really intriguing. Traders didn't just rely on the celestial positioning for the timing of tea preparation, they also believed that certain stars and constellations would influence the ingredients that should be added to the tea. For example, during certain times of the year, when the stars of Taurus were visible in the sky, traders would add a blend of mint and ginger, both of which were believed to align with the earthy energy of the bull. Similarly, when the constellations of Pisces or Cancer were high in the sky, tea would often be brewed with herbs like lavender or rose petals, which were thought to balance the emotional energy associated with water signs. The complexity of tea's relationship with the cosmos didn't stop there. It wasn't just about the stars themselves, it was about the deeper, symbolic meanings they carried. Astrology was a way of interpreting the world, a lens through which everything, from the growth of crops to the health of the body, could be understood. For traders on the Silk Road, astrology became a guiding force, influencing everything from their routes to the preparation of their tea. It gave them a sense of control over an otherwise unpredictable world. If you could read the stars and brew your tea at the right moment, you might just gain an edge in the cutthroat world of Silk Road trade. What's more fascinating is that this connection between tea and astrology didn't just belong to the East. As tea began to spread along the Silk Road, it carried with it these astrological beliefs. It wasn't just the Chinese or Central Asian merchants who believed in the power of the stars. Traders from Persia, India, and even Europe would have encountered these practices and perhaps even adopted them in their own tea rituals. Tea, in this sense, wasn't just a commodity, it was a cultural connector, a bridge between not only distant lands but also between the natural and celestial worlds. And here's something that might surprise you: while this celestial tea brewing might seem far-fetched, some modern-day herbalists and tea aficionados still honor the idea of brewing tea according to the moon phases. It's become a niche practice in certain parts of the world, with people claiming that tea brewed on a waxing moon is especially energizing, while tea brewed on a waning moon is better for relaxation and sleep. Whether or not there's any real power behind these lunar tea practices is up for debate, but the symbolism behind them echoes the ancient beliefs of traders on the Silk Road. Even today, many people find comfort in the idea that the universe has a hand in the simple act of making tea. Imagine sitting by a campfire on a quiet night, watching the moon climb higher in the sky, and thinking about how your tea is not just something you drink, it's something that is connected to the very stars above you. The connection between tea and the cosmos isn't just a fun historical tidbit, it's a reminder that tea, in all its forms, has always been a part of something much larger, a cultural practice that binds together nature, spirituality, and the human experience. Tea wasn't just about taste, health, or survival on the Silk Road. It was about tapping into something ancient and cosmic, aligning the human body and spirit with the rhythms of the universe. And whether or not you believe in the stars influencing your tea, there's something undeniably magical about the idea that a simple cup of tea could carry with it the wisdom of the universe. With the stars above us and the cosmic tea brewing in our cups, let's now turn our attention to the hidden and often unspoken power that tea held across the Silk Road, its role as a symbol of power and influence. It's easy to imagine tea as just a beverage, something to sip while relaxing after a long day, but in the ancient world of the Silk Road, tea carried a much more significant weight. Tea was, In many ways, a subtle form of communication, a quiet symbol of control, and a token of social status. Historians still argue whether the significance of tea as a symbol of power evolved over time or whether it was always ingrained in its very nature. One thing is clear, however, tea was a currency of sorts, one that transcended mere trade. It wasn't just about trading tea for silk or spices, it was about using tea to influence and negotiate in ways that were often far more subtle than the clinking of coins or the exchange of precious metals. Whether it was a ruler offering tea as a gesture of goodwill or a merchant presenting a rare blend as a diplomatic tool, tea was often used as a means to gain favor, build alliances, and reinforce power dynamics. To see this in action, we can look at the role of tea in the courts of emperors and rulers along the Silk Road. Tea wasn't just something served at the dinner table, it was a symbol of the emperor's wealth and influence. Rulers in China, Persia, and Central Asia, for example, often used tea to display their status and control. Offering tea to guests wasn't simply an act of hospitality, it was a subtle reminder of the ruler's power, a way to show that they were in a position to provide for others, even offering them the finest tea blends as a mark of prestige. Tea, in this sense, functioned almost like a diplomatic tool. For example, if a ruler wanted to impress or pacify a visiting diplomat or merchant from a foreign land, they might present a rare, exotic blend of tea, signaling respect and offering a form of silent negotiation. The act of offering tea could serve as a symbol of power, one that didn't need to be articulated with words, but was understood all the same. Imagine being a high-ranking official in one of these ancient courts, sitting across from a ruler as you sip tea. That single cup of tea wasn't just a drink, it was a message. It was an unspoken agreement, a gesture that carried political weight. Tea was also used strategically to form alliances between different factions, even between rivals. A rare blend of tea, traded across vast distances from the distant reaches of China, could serve as a token of friendship, a way to smooth over tensions between warring tribes or competing empires. The presentation of tea during these negotiations wasn't just about offering hospitality, it was a way to show that one side had something valuable to offer, something rare, something prized. In this way, tea became more than just an item of trade, it became a currency of influence. Oh, and don't think for a second that the common traveler didn't understand the power of tea. While it may have been reserved for the elite in royal courts, tea was just as powerful in the hands of merchants and traders. Along the Silk Road, tea wasn't only about what you could trade or sell, it was about who you could trust, who you could impress, and who you could manipulate. In many cases, merchants and traders would use tea as a way to bond with potential allies, offering a cup to seal a deal or smooth over any disagreements. The act of sharing tea created a bond between individuals, whether they were from the same land or from distant corners of the world. It allowed for cooperation in a world that was often defined by distrust and competition. But it wasn't just about building alliances, tea could also be used to exclude, to assert dominance over others. In some cases, traders would withhold tea from competitors or rivals, using it as a tool to assert control over the flow of goods. Imagine being in a bustling market, watching as a powerful merchant refuses to offer tea to a competitor, or perhaps offers a lower quality tea to send a message. It's a subtle act of dominance, but one that carries a lot of weight in a world where status was everything. This power dynamic surrounding tea extended to the social structures of the Silk Road as well. While tea was prized by the elite, it was also a part of the daily life of the common people, albeit in a different context. For the lower classes, tea wasn't about status or diplomacy, it was about survival. It provided warmth and sustenance, and in some cases, it was an affordable alternative to alcohol. But even in these everyday circumstances, tea carried with it an implicit social structure. For example, tea was often served in communal settings, where its sharing symbolized the strength of community bonds. However, there were also social hierarchies within the tea-drinking ritual itself. In certain cultures, the way tea was prepared, served, and consumed could indicate one's rank in society. Imagine entering a caravanserai after a long day's journey, exhausted and parched. You're offered a simple cup of tea by a merchant, and you take it gratefully. But in that moment, you're also being reminded of your place in the world. The way the tea is served, the size of the cup, the quality of the tea leaves, the ritual around it, might tell you whether you're being treated as a guest or merely a traveler passing through. Tea, in this way, acted as both a social equalizer and a divider, reinforcing the status quo in ways that went unnoticed by most. The power of tea along the Silk Road wasn't just about what it represented in terms of wealth or status, it was also about the relationships it fostered and the networks it created. Tea wasn't just a physical commodity, it was an integral part of the social fabric, weaving together individuals, families, merchants, and empires. It was a symbol of unity, a currency of diplomacy, and a tool of influence. It had the power to shape the course of history in ways that weren't always visible, but were always felt. As you sip your tea tonight, think about how, throughout history, this simple drink has carried with it so much weight, so much power. In the world of the Silk Road, tea wasn't just a drink, it was a language, one spoken quietly, yet with great impact. As we sip our tea, reflecting on its power and symbolism, let's now travel forward through time to examine how the reach of tea on the Silk Road stretched far beyond the boundaries of Asia and reached the shores of Europe. The spread of tea along the Silk Road wasn't just about its journey through deserts or over mountains, it was about how tea transformed entire cultures. What began as a rare commodity in the East slowly made its way westward, and in doing so, it left a lasting mark on Europe's history and culture. But how did this happen? Historians still argue whether the Europeans discovered tea through direct trade with the East or if it was through intermediaries. While the exact timeline is still debated, it's generally agreed that by the 16th century, tea had reached the European continent, though it was first encountered by the Portuguese and Dutch merchants who were trading along the coasts of Asia. For centuries, the European elite saw tea as an exotic, mysterious beverage, coveted for both its rarity and its connection to the Silk Road, a symbol of the East's enigmatic allure. Oh, and I can imagine the scene: European merchants, who had long been obsessed with the luxuries from the East, finally laid their hands on their first tea shipments, transported through vast networks and under the cover of secrecy. They tasted it and were immediately captivated. But what's truly fascinating about the European encounter with tea is not just the drink itself, but the role it played in shaping European trade, social life, and even politics. At first, tea was a rare luxury, accessible only to the wealthiest of Europeans. It wasn't just a drink, it was a status symbol. The first mention of tea in European records dates back to the early 17th century when Portuguese missionaries and traders brought back accounts of this mysterious beverage they had encountered in China. By the time the Dutch introduced tea to England in the 1650s, it quickly became a sensation. For the European aristocracy, tea wasn't just a novelty, it became an essential part of social life. It was during this period that the first tea houses began to emerge in cities like London, where both the elite and the growing middle class would gather to drink tea, discuss business, and forge social connections. Tea's status as a symbol of power, wealth, and refinement was quickly solidified in Europe. It wasn't just the taste or the purported health benefits that captivated people, it was the ritual that surrounded it. The manner in which tea was served became a symbol of sophistication. Fine porcelain teapots, delicate cups, and the finest tea leaves all signaled a certain level of cultural refinement. Those who were seen drinking tea were automatically associated with the intellectual, social, and cultural elites of the time. Tea wasn't just a drink, it became a defining feature of European aristocracy. The early 18th century brought with it an interesting development in the world of tea. It was no longer only reserved for the elite. By the time tea was introduced to the English colonies in the Americas, it had spread beyond royal courts and aristocratic circles and into the homes of average citizens. The Dutch had been trading tea extensively with the West, and by the 1700s, the English East India Company was playing a dominant role in distributing tea to the European market. For the growing middle class in England, drinking tea became an important part of their daily life, though, of course, with a very different set of social expectations than those of the nobility. Oh, and here's a little tidbit: the East India Company's role in this trade was pivotal. The company monopolized the flow of tea from China to England, and by the 18th century, tea had become an integral part of British culture. It wasn't just about sipping tea in the privacy of one's home, it was about tea in the public sphere. Tea houses became social hubs, where individuals could meet to discuss business, politics, or simply engage in the latest gossip. The phrase, "a cup of tea," would eventually become synonymous with a break in the day, a time for relaxation, reflection, and connection. But it wasn't all peaceful tea sipping. Tea also played a key role in some of the more dramatic political moments in history, particularly the infamous Boston Tea Party of 1773. Tea, once a symbol of luxury and elegance, became the flashpoint of a revolution. The American colonists, frustrated with British taxation on tea, famously protested by dumping an entire shipment of tea into Boston Harbor, a symbolic act of defiance against the British Crown. The tea, once a luxurious good, had now become a symbol of rebellion and resistance, a stark reminder of how far-reaching tea's influence had become. The rise of tea's popularity also had a lasting impact on European economies. The demand for tea spurred entire industries, from porcelain manufacturing to the rise of large-scale plantations in the Americas, particularly in India and the Caribbean. But as much as tea influenced the economy, it also had a social impact. In England, tea was often served at afternoon tea, a social event that became an institution in the 19th century. The ritual of afternoon tea brought together people of all social classes in a way that no other event could. It was an opportunity for people to socialize, network, and solidify their place in society, all while enjoying a cup of tea. Now, let's take a step back and think about the vast cultural transformation that tea brought to Europe. It wasn't just a drink, it was a vehicle for social change, a way for people to connect across class boundaries, and a symbol of the East's deep influence on Western society. From being a rare, exotic commodity to becoming an essential part of daily life, tea had an enduring impact on European culture. And as you sit back with your own cup of tea tonight, think about how it has traveled across time and space, through deserts, mountains, and oceans, reaching far beyond the confines of the Silk Road. It's a drink that has, quite literally, crossed borders and cultures, uniting people from all walks of life. Whether sipped in a palace, in a bustling marketplace, or in the quiet of your own home, tea has always been much more than just a drink. It has been a symbol of connection, power, and culture, a constant thread running through the tapestry of human history. As we look at tea's far-reaching influence on both Eastern and Western societies, let's now take a step back and examine the broader cultural impact tea had along the Silk Road and beyond. What happened to this once secretive and revered beverage as it spread across continents? What does its journey tell us about the changing dynamics of trade, culture, and power along the Silk Road? Historians still debate how the rise of tea from a niche luxury to a global phenomenon influenced cultural exchange on the Silk Road. Was it primarily the trade routes that shaped tea's evolution, or was it the way different cultures shaped tea itself? Tea became so much more than just a beverage, it became a cultural touchstone, carrying with it stories, traditions, and rituals that transcended geographical boundaries. It's as if each step along the Silk Road left a mark on tea, altering its very nature as it passed through diverse cultures. When tea first entered the Silk Road trade networks, it was more than just a commodity, it was a cultural artifact. The way it was made, prepared, and consumed was deeply rooted in the spiritual and daily life of the peoples of China, India, Central Asia, and Persia. In China, tea was not only seen as a medicinal drink but also as a spiritual experience, often prepared with precise care and attention to the elements. Tea ceremonies weren't just about tea, they were a reflection of the Taoist concept of harmony with nature. For Chinese tea masters, the process of brewing tea was as sacred as the tea itself. As tea moved westward along the Silk Road, it wasn't just the ingredients that changed, it was the ritual surrounding it. In Persia, tea became a symbol of hospitality. It was during these early tea drinking sessions that the ritual of sharing tea took on new meanings. The Persians, who had a long tradition of tea drinking, viewed it as a way to foster trust and goodwill. Tea was offered as a form of friendship, its warm embrace creating a bond between host and guest. When the drink crossed into Central Asia, it became a symbol of health and strength, especially in the harsh, unforgiving conditions of the desert. Herbal blends with mint, sage, and ginger became popular, as these herbs were thought to provide relief from the heat and fatigue of the long journeys traders endured. By the time tea reached the Middle East, it had become synonymous with civilization and refinement. The elite in regions like Persia, the Ottoman Empire, and Egypt adopted tea-drinking customs as part of their daily lives. The ceremonial nature of tea became intertwined with social rituals. Tea was served during courtly gatherings, and it quickly became a drink of power and status. These cultures didn't just adapt tea into their daily routines, they infused it with their own sense of pride, creating something uniquely their own. It was a drink that, over time, became synonymous with both social interaction and prestige. Oh, and let's not forget how tea made its way to India. It's said that tea was initially consumed in India as a form of medicinal herb, but it wasn't long before the British began to cultivate tea on Indian soil. The British East India Company took control of the tea trade, transforming the local tea-growing regions into vast plantations. Tea, once a rare commodity on the Silk Road, had now found a permanent home in India. This period would see the rise of India as one of the world's largest tea producers, shaping the future of global tea culture in ways that still influence the market today. But here's where things get interesting. As tea spread along the Silk Road, it wasn't just consumed by the elites or traders, it became deeply embedded in everyday life. The way people drank tea began to evolve with local customs. In China, for example, tea remained a drink of both luxury and simplicity, where it was consumed with quiet reflection, especially in the context of traditional tea ceremonies. But in Europe, tea became a vehicle for social gatherings, and in places like England, it evolved into the iconic afternoon tea tradition, a casual affair where one could socialize and discuss everything from the trivial to the significant. In Central Asia, where the vastness of the land and the movement of people were constant, tea was consumed as a form of physical and mental endurance. It was often blended with herbs like cumin or anise to provide comfort during long travels across treacherous terrain. For the nomads of the region, tea wasn't just a luxury, it was an essential drink that helped sustain their energy during long treks across the steppe. And, of course, in regions like India and Sri Lanka, tea became intertwined with the culture and the economy, as tea cultivation and trade boomed. But let's take a moment to think about the true cultural impact of tea. It wasn't just a drink that followed the movements of trade, it was something that had its own life, its own way of adapting and thriving wherever it went. Tea brought people together, yes, but it also revealed something important. The way people interact with tea says a lot about their values, their social structures, and their approach to life. The spread of tea from east to west, and the way it became a global commodity, had lasting effects on the cultural fabric of many regions. In the process of trading tea, cultures exchanged more than just goods. Tea became a medium for the spread of ideas, philosophies, and customs. It was one of the most visible signs of the interconnectedness of the ancient world. And as it continued to spread and evolve, it played a role in shaping the world we know today. Whether in the lavish tea houses of 17th-century England, the cozy tea corners of modern-day China, or the bustling streets of India, tea continues to be a reflection of culture, history, and humanity's shared bond. In today's world, tea is often associated with relaxation, connection, and mindfulness. And as we sip our tea tonight, we're continuing a tradition that spans centuries and continents. Tea is no longer confined to the Silk Road or the courts of emperors, it's become a universal symbol of hospitality, warmth, and unity. It's a reminder of how even the simplest things, like a cup of tea, can carry deep cultural meaning and have a lasting impact on the world. Now, as we look at the global spread of tea, let's take a closer look at its rise and fall in cultural importance across the centuries. Tea's journey along the Silk Road didn't just shape trade, it also shaped the very cultural landscapes it passed through. Its evolution didn't follow a linear path, instead, it experienced periods of rise and decline, deeply intertwined with the shifting tides of empires, politics, and social movements. Tea's influence reached a peak during the height of the Silk Road, but as empires rose and fell, so too did its prominence in certain cultures. And as tea spread across Asia, it began to take on new significance, not just as a commodity, but as an essential part of daily life and culture. Yet, with time, the prominence of tea would shift, and in certain periods, it would fade into the background, only to rise again in new contexts. Historians still debate why tea fell out of favor in certain regions, particularly in the West, during the early modern period. One theory is that, as European empires expanded, they grew increasingly preoccupied with the colonization of new lands, and commodities like tea were relegated to the back burner in favor of more lucrative goods like sugar and tobacco. During this time, European interest in tea slowed down, especially as the complexities of colonialism began to shape the global market. The rise of coffeehouses, for example, started to eclipse tea in European social life, especially in places like England and France. The rise of coffeehouses in the 17th century marked a shift in European drinking culture, and tea, for a time, was left behind. But this wasn't the end of tea's story. The 18th and 19th centuries saw a revival in the appreciation for tea, especially in Britain, where it regained its status as an essential part of social life. Afternoon tea, originally a necessity for the aristocracy to bridge the long gap between lunch and dinner, became a widespread tradition among all classes in England, cementing tea as an integral part of British culture. Tea became symbolic of England's imperial power, traded across the globe through the influence of the British East India Company. As tea became more widely available, it was no longer just the drink of kings and queens, it became an everyday drink for all social classes. The emergence of tea plantations in places like India, Sri Lanka, and Africa transformed tea from a rare commodity to a mass-produced item, available to anyone who could afford it. In countries like India, tea also played an important role in the struggle for independence. The tea plantations, originally set up under British colonial rule, became a point of contention, symbolizing both the reach of British imperialism and the fight for self-sufficiency. Oh, and there's a fascinating moment in history where tea's role was both symbolic and political: the Boston Tea Party in 1773. What began as a protest against British taxation without representation became one of the most famous moments in American history. The event didn't just represent resistance, it was a dramatic act of rebellion that placed tea at the very heart of a new nation's identity. The act of throwing tea into the Boston harbor wasn't just a protest against taxes, it was a rejection of the British control over the flow of goods, including the very drink that had become a symbol of luxury and power. Back in Britain, though, tea continued to hold its place in society as a symbol of order and civility. It was deeply embedded in the social fabric, especially with the introduction of the British afternoon tea tradition, a uniquely British ritual that became synonymous with polite society. It was a time for socializing, gossip, and intellectual discussion, all over a steaming pot of tea. The ritual of afternoon tea became so ingrained in British culture that it eventually spread to the colonies, where it became a symbol of British culture in regions like India and Africa. And it wasn't just in the West that tea had a resurgence. In Asia, the 19th century saw tea evolving from a medicinal drink to an everyday beverage. In China and Japan, the tea ceremony remained a central part of cultural identity, with tea being used in highly ritualized, spiritual settings. In Japan, the tea ceremony, or shinoyu, continued to be a formalized ritual, symbolizing harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. The Japanese tea ceremony remains an art form to this day, a living tradition that draws on the deep history of tea along the Silk Road. But by the 20th century, tea found itself at the crossroads of globalization. The production of tea became a global industry, with tea plants thriving in many different countries. By the 20th century, tea had spread to places where it was once unheard of, like Africa, where it became a major cash crop, particularly in countries like Kenya and Malawi. The global demand for tea led to the expansion of plantations, and tea was increasingly seen as a product for the masses, no longer just the drink of royalty or the elite. Today, tea is a ubiquitous beverage. It's found in every corner of the globe, served in 1,000 different forms, from traditional Chinese green tea to British black tea to modern iced teas and tea lattes. Yet, as it continues to evolve and adapt to different cultures and preferences, tea still retains the echoes of its ancient past. Even as its role as a symbol of wealth and power fades, tea remains deeply embedded in the social fabric of societies around the world. It's a drink that connects us to history, to culture, and to each other. And as you sit with your cup of tea tonight, think about how it's not just a drink, it's part of a long journey. Tea has traveled through deserts, across seas, and through centuries, carrying with it stories of power, culture, and change. It's more than a beverage. It's a part of the shared human experience, one that continues to evolve and connect us all. As we explore the continued evolution of tea, let's now step back and reflect on how it was carried through the shifting sands of time, beyond the grand royal courts, away from the lavish tea houses, and into the hearts of distant royal courts and distant, isolated corners of the world. Tea's role evolved dramatically with the rise and fall of empires, but one thing remained constant: it became intertwined with the powerful rituals of rulers and leaders. Even when the grandiosity of the Silk Road began to wane, tea carried on as an instrument of politics, diplomacy, and, at times, even survival. It's easy to think of tea as a drink that simply crosses paths with history, but it is also a significant marker in the journeys of powerful rulers and statesmen. Take, for example, the Qing dynasty in China. The Qing emperors of the 17th and 18th centuries didn't just drink tea, they perfected its ritual. Tea was deeply embedded in their courts and their cultural practice, and it held symbolic power. At the height of the Qing dynasty, tea was so important that it became part of the imperial tribute system. Regions across the vast empire would send their best teas as tribute to the emperor, offering not just the tea leaves but a statement of loyalty to the emperor's rule. Tea was so integral to the court that it was said that no state affair was complete without the exchange of tea. Historians still argue whether these tea tributes were mere tokens of diplomacy or whether they played a deeper role in maintaining the emperor's absolute power. Some scholars suggest that tea, in these political exchanges, was seen as a way of solidifying bonds, of asserting dominance in the most subtle ways. The emperor, as the center of power in China, used the exchange of tea as both a form of benevolence and a reminder of imperial authority. After all, tea was, in many ways, a direct representation of China's superior culture, and offering it to foreign dignitaries wasn't just about hospitality, it was about reinforcing the idea that China held the reins of civilization. Oh, and let's not forget the political weight tea carried in other parts of Asia, such as Japan, where it became deeply woven into the fabric of both everyday life and political maneuvering. During the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, tea gained increasing importance in Japan as the Japanese tea ceremony grew into a highly sophisticated art form. But it wasn't just about aesthetic refinement. Tea ceremonies in Japan also became symbols of unity and political legitimacy. Samurai leaders and ruling elites used the tea ceremony as a tool for reinforcing their status and maintaining control. Hosting a tea ceremony became a strategic move for reinforcing relationships with other feudal lords, building alliances, or consolidating power within their own ranks. Tea, you see, had evolved from being a rare and coveted item traded along the Silk Road to a cultural cornerstone in both the East and the West. It was no longer just a drink, it was a medium for diplomacy, a symbol of power, and a tool for empire building. In fact, when European empires sought to expand their reach, one of the first places they turned was to the tea trade. The British, for example, became so deeply entrenched in the global tea trade that it became synonymous with British imperial power. The influence of tea wasn't restricted to Asia. It extended into the political maneuverings of colonial powers like Britain, whose control of the tea trade shaped not only its empire but also its cultural identity. The British East India Company, which controlled much of the trade of goods between Asia and Europe, was instrumental in making tea one of the most profitable commodities in the world. As tea made its way into British society, it wasn't just about personal consumption, it became part of the very fabric of British identity. The aristocracy's tea-drinking habits were a direct reflection of British political dominance, and as the tea trade flourished, it fueled the expansion of the British Empire. In the colonial era, tea became both a symbol of British refinement and a tool of economic control. Entire industries were built around the tea trade, and British colonization in India would leave an indelible mark on tea cultivation and consumption in the region. In the mid-1800s, tea plantations were established across India's hills and valleys. The British Empire not only cultivated tea in India to meet the demand of British society but also to establish a monopoly over the global tea market, further entrenching the empire's economic influence. As you can imagine, tea's journey wasn't just about transporting goods, it was about transporting power. Tea's reach extended from the emperors of China to the lords of Japan, from the courts of Persian kings to the bustling markets of London. Tea became a vehicle for negotiations, for the cementing of alliances, for asserting dominance, and at times, for rebellion. Remember the American Revolution? The Boston Tea Party wasn't just an act of political resistance, it was an act that symbolized the rejection of British colonial control, with the dumping of British tea into the harbor marking one of the most significant moments in American history. In that single act, tea transcended its role as a beverage and became the embodiment of resistance. What's fascinating about tea is that despite its association with power, luxury, and rebellion, it has always been an egalitarian force, uniting people from different cultures, classes, and backgrounds. Whether it's the tea ceremony in Japan or a humble cup shared among traders along the Silk Road, tea has a unique way of bringing people together. And today, in our modern world, tea remains one of the most consumed beverages on earth. Its symbolism, whether of empire or rebellion, of tradition or connection, continues to resonate. And so, here we are, sipping our tea tonight. Perhaps we don't wield tea as a tool for empire building or revolution, but the act of drinking tea still connects us to an ancient and global tradition. It's a reminder of how the simple act of drinking tea, whether during a ceremonial moment or a casual chat, carries with it the weight of centuries of history, culture, and the quiet exchanges that shape our world. As we sip our tea, reflecting on its complex cultural and political significance, let's now step into the quieter corners of the Silk Road's legacy, the impact of tea on personal and communal life. While much of tea's history has been intertwined with power, diplomacy, and trade, its most enduring influence might just be the role it played in everyday social life. Whether in bustling market squares, tranquil gardens, or remote caravanserais, tea has been a companion for countless moments of connection, conversation, and reflection. Tea, as simple as it may seem, has always been a catalyst for fostering community. Long before it became a global commodity, it was a symbol of hospitality and camaraderie. As travelers and traders crossed vast, inhospitable landscapes, they often found respite not only in shelter but in the shared act of drinking tea. Imagine, for a moment, the long journeys of traders traveling the Silk Road. The arduous trips across deserts, mountains, and treacherous terrain would leave them weary and isolated. But when they finally found an oasis or a caravanserai, what did they do? They gathered around a fire, shared tea, and found comfort in the warmth of both the beverage and each other's company. Tea, at its core, became an unspoken language of connection, transcending the differences between cultures, religions, and social classes. Traders from China, Persia, India, and Central Asia would sit side by side, sipping tea in a gesture of solidarity, however fleeting. The very act of offering tea was a way of saying, "I see you, I recognize your humanity, and in this moment, we are equals." This simple gesture, a sip shared across cultures, has echoed throughout history, creating bonds between individuals who otherwise might have remained strangers. Historians still argue whether these shared moments of tea drinking had deeper implications for the social cohesion of Silk Road societies, but there's no denying that tea was at the heart of some of the most significant social traditions. It was during these quiet, intimate tea ceremonies that stories were exchanged, alliances forged, and ideas shared. Tea wasn't just a drink, it was a conversation starter, a medium through which cultures could understand each other and, in many cases, find common ground. In Japan, the tea ceremony exemplifies this intimate, ritualized connection between tea and community. While the art of the tea ceremony is deeply spiritual and steeped in formality, it also emphasizes harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. It was a space where people could come together in quiet reflection, setting aside the pressures of the outside world. The tea ceremony is a living testament to the enduring power of tea to bring people together, not through grand speeches or political negotiations, but through the simple act of sharing a cup of tea. And tea's role in communal life wasn't confined to the East. In England, the afternoon tea tradition began as a way for the upper classes to take a break in the late afternoon and catch up with each other. Over time, it became a cherished social institution that transcended class boundaries. Tea wasn't just about quenching thirst, it was about creating an opportunity for meaningful interaction. The rise of tea houses and salons during the 17th and 18th centuries further amplified this role, making tea the beverage of choice for intellectuals, politicians, and artists. In these spaces, ideas were exchanged over tea, shaping political movements, cultural trends, and even social reform. Oh, and let's not forget the role of tea in more personal moments. For countless people along the Silk Road, tea was a comforting companion after a long day's work or a soothing ritual in the morning. It wasn't always about grand events or formal ceremonies. Sometimes, it was simply about a quiet moment alone or with loved ones, the steam rising from a cup, offering a brief respite from the struggles of the day. Whether served in a modest clay cup in a village house or in delicate porcelain in an imperial palace, tea provided the same solace, the same sense of connection to something larger than oneself. As we reflect on the deeper social role of tea, let's consider its ability to transcend the temporal and connect people across generations. Even as the world changed, dynasties rose and fell, empires expanded and contracted, tea remained a constant. It was passed down from one generation to the next, each iteration of the tradition preserving a piece of history, culture, and human connection. Tea wasn't just a beverage for its time, it was something meant to be enjoyed, shared, and passed on. This timelessness of tea, its ability to survive through wars, political upheavals, and changing social dynamics, is perhaps its most powerful trait. Even as we live in a world vastly different from the days of the Silk Road, we still share tea with family, friends, and strangers. The ritual of sitting down together, of offering tea to someone, of brewing a pot and letting the aroma fill the room, remains unchanged across cultures. Tea, no matter where or when, continues to offer the same invitation, to pause, to connect, to reflect. And in this way, tea is not just a drink, it's a link to the past, a thread connecting us to the ancient world of the Silk Road. It's a quiet reminder that, even as time moves forward and cultures evolve, the simple acts of kindness and shared connection can transcend borders and time. We may no longer be sipping tea in the shadow of the great caravanserais or amidst the grandeur of the imperial courts, but we are still part of that same long tradition, a tradition that has traveled through centuries and across continents, just as tea itself has. So, as we take one final sip of tea tonight, think about all that has passed before, how this humble drink has shaped not only the course of history but also our shared experiences, our friendships, and our communities. In its simplest form, tea remains a symbol of unity, comfort, and connection, a thread that binds us to the distant past and to each other. As we near the end of this journey through the history of tea, it's time to pause and reflect on the legacy that tea leaves behind, not just as a drink, but as a cultural and social force that has shaped the course of human history. From its humble beginnings as a medicinal drink in ancient China to its spread along the Silk Road, tea has seen its fair share of transformations. It's been an emblem of power, diplomacy, rebellion, and connection. And even as the world continues to change, tea remains a constant, linking us to a past that is both distant and intimately close. Historians still argue about the exact reasons why tea rituals faded in certain regions and flourished in others, but the one thing that stands out is tea's remarkable adaptability. It has evolved to fit the cultural and social norms of every region it touched, from the highly formalized tea ceremonies in Japan to the casual, everyday cup sipped in homes across Europe and Asia. Its ability to connect people from all walks of life, to bring them together around a shared ritual, is a testament to its enduring power. What's truly remarkable is how tea continues to resonate with us today, despite the centuries that have passed since its introduction to the world. Whether it's the quiet comfort of a morning cup or the ceremonial elegance of an afternoon tea, tea has remained a part of the global fabric. It's in the lives of the elite and the humble alike, continuing to serve as a symbol of unity, reflection, and tradition. And, in many ways, tea's role has grown even more significant in today's globalized world. In a time when cultures are constantly shifting and boundaries are becoming less defined, tea remains a universal language. It's something that we all share, no matter where we come from, no matter our background. It connects us in ways that go beyond simple trade or diplomacy. It's a connection that's deeply personal and yet profoundly communal. The role of tea in modern life has taken on new dimensions. It's no longer just a drink for the elite or a tool of diplomacy, it's a bridge across cultural divides, a way for people to connect in our fast-paced, often disconnected world. With the rise of the global tea market, we have access to an incredible variety of tea from all corners of the world. It's no longer a commodity reserved for a select few, it's available to all of us, no matter where we are or who we are. And, perhaps more than ever, we're beginning to understand the importance of tea not just as a drink, but as a form of self-care. In today's world, where everything seems to be moving faster and faster, tea offers us a moment to pause, to reflect, and to reconnect with ourselves. Tea has always been more than just a way to quench our thirst, it's a ritual that invites us to slow down, to be present, and to find comfort in simplicity. But the legacy of tea goes beyond individual comfort. It's about the way it's brought people together for thousands of years. The shared experience of drinking tea, whether in the royal courts of ancient empires or in the homes of everyday people, has always been a moment of connection. Even now, as we sit with our tea, we're participating in a long tradition, a tradition that has lasted for centuries, crossing borders, overcoming barriers, and linking generations. Oh, and as you think about tea's legacy, consider the impact it's had on today's global trade and economies. Tea is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, providing livelihoods for millions of people across the world. Whether it's grown in the highlands of Sri Lanka, the hills of India, or the vast fields of China, tea remains one of the most traded commodities in the world. It's a testament to how something as simple as a plant can have such a profound impact on the global economy. But perhaps the most important thing to remember is that tea, at its core, has always been about connection. It's not just about the leaves, the water, or the sugar, it's about what happens when people come together to share a moment, however small, over a cup of tea. It's about how a drink, simple in its ingredients, can carry centuries of history, culture, and tradition in every sip. As we bring this journey to a close, take a moment to reflect on all the stories we've shared about tea, its role in the rise and fall of empires, its influence on social life, and its ability to bring people together across cultures and time. Tea is more than just a drink, it's a link between the past and the present, a bridge that connects us all. So, as you sip your tea tonight, remember that you're not just drinking a beverage, you're participating in a tradition that has traveled through centuries and across continents, connecting people in ways that transcend time and space. Now, slow down, savor the warmth of your tea, and allow the quiet comfort of this ritual to remind you of all the ways in which tea continues to shape the world. It's more than just a drink, it's a symbol of our shared humanity, a reminder that, no matter where we come from, we are all connected by this simple, yet powerful, cup of tea.